You already know what murder looks like. You've seen it in 1,000 movies, read about it in the news this morning, maybe watched a true crime documentary last night while eating dinner. We are surrounded by it, saturated by it. And somewhere along the way, most of us stopped asking the most obvious question of all. When did it start? Not war, not armies, not empires fighting over borders. The very first time one human being looked at another human being and decided to end them. When did that happen, and what does the evidence actually show? Because here is what most people assume. They assume that early humans were peaceful. That violence came later with civilization, with property, with greed. That's somewhere back in the deep past, before cities and kings and armies, people lived in something closer to harmony. It is a comforting idea. It is also almost certainly wrong. In 2015, a team of researchers working in a cave system in northern Spain called Cima de los Huesos pulled something out of the rock that changed the conversation entirely. They had been excavating the site for years. Cima de los Huesos means pit of bones in Spanish, and that name is accurate, yeah. The pit contains the skeletal remains of at least 28 individuals who lived roughly 430,000 years ago. One of those individuals, known only as Cranium 17, had something that stopped the researchers cold: two holes punched into the front of the skull, both in almost exactly the same location. The researchers analyzed the wounds carefully: the shape, the angle, the depth. Both injuries were caused by the same object, a sharp-edged stone tool, striking the same spot in rapid succession. One blow can be an accident. One blow can be a fall, a rock, 1,000 different things. But two blows, same weapon, same location, delivered with enough force to fracture bone both times. That is not an accident. That is intent. The researchers published their findings in the journal PLOS ONE. Their conclusion was careful, as scientific conclusions always are, but it was unavoidable. This was, in all likelihood, the oldest evidence of lethal interpersonal violence ever found, the oldest murder weapon, the oldest crime scene. And here is the detail that should stop you cold. The person who did this was not a predator, not a different species, not something we would look at and fail to recognize. They were human, same species as the victim, probably knew their face. The first murder was not a stranger in the dark, it was someone close. The skull from Cima de los Huesos is not alone. Once researchers knew what to look for, they started finding it everywhere. And the picture that emerged was not the story anyone wanted to tell. In 2012, archaeologists excavating a dry lake bed in Kenya called Nataruk uncovered the remains of 27 people: men, women, children. They had died roughly 10,000 years ago, and the bones told the story with brutal clarity. Crushed skulls, broken knees, a stone projectile lodged inside one skull, fused to the bone over millennia. Several of the skeletons were found in postures that suggested their hands had been bound at the moment of death. These were not people buried by their community, they were left where they fell. The researchers who published the Nadaruk findings in the journal Nature called it the earliest scientifically documented evidence of prehistoric conflict. Not a ritual, not an accident, a deliberate, organized attack on a group of people who had no time to run. But here is where it gets complicated. Because for most of the 20th century, anthropologists were split almost completely down the middle on what this kind of evidence actually meant. On one side stood researchers like Raymond Dart and later Lawrence Keeley. They argued that violence was ancient, instinctual, wired into us long before civilization gave it a name. On the other side stood those who followed a more Rousseau-shaped idea of human nature, that war was an invention, that it came with agriculture, with land ownership, with things worth fighting over, that before all of that, people were fundamentally cooperative. Both sides had evidence. Both sides had blind spots. What changed the argument was not one dramatic discovery. It was the accumulation, site after site, continent after continent. Researchers developed increasingly precise methods for distinguishing between different kinds of trauma on ancient bone. The gnaw marks of predators look different from the clean strikes of stone tools. Ritual treatment of the dead leaves different signatures than violent death. And as those methods improved, the record became harder to explain away. Forensic anthropologist Stephen LeBlanc spent years compiling data from prehistoric sites around the world. What he found was that in the majority of excavated prehistoric cemeteries, a significant percentage of the skeletons showed signs of violent trauma. Not rare, not exceptional, consistent. The uncomfortable conclusion was already forming before anyone wanted to say it out loud. Violence between humans was not a late arrival. It was not something civilization introduced into an otherwise peaceful species. It had been here the whole time. So the question stops being whether, the question becomes why. And the answer is stranger and more unsettling than simply saying humans are violent by nature, because that explanation, satisfying as it feels, does not actually explain anything. Plenty of animals are aggressive, very few of them plan an ambush, coordinate with others, cross miles of terrain, and carry it out against members of their own species with tools designed specifically for the purpose. What humans developed was something different, not just aggression, coalitional killing. Primatologist Richard Wrangham spent decades studying chimpanzees in the wild and noticed something that disturbed him. Chimpanzee groups conducted raids. Small parties of males would move quietly into neighboring territory, find an isolated individual, and attack as a group. The victim almost never survived, and the attackers took almost no risk. This was not two individuals fighting. This was organized, deliberate, low cost violence against a target chosen specifically because they were vulnerable. Wrangham argued that humans inherited this pattern and then amplified it. We added weapons that worked at a distance. We added language, which meant we could plan days in advance. We added the ability to form coalitions with individuals outside our immediate group. The result was something no other species on Earth had ever produced. Violence that was strategic, scalable, and could be carried out with minimal personal risk to the attacker. But here is the turn that almost nobody expects. Wrangham's later research led him to a conclusion that sounds like a paradox. He calls it self-domestication. The same coalitional capacity that made humans capable of organized killing also made us capable of something else entirely: executing our own aggressors. In small scale societies studied by anthropologists, dominant bullies and violent individuals were frequently killed by the group, not in a fight, collectively, deliberately, with planning. The most dangerous individual in the group could be brought down by 3 or 4 people acting together. Over tens of thousands of generations, Wrangham argues, this created selection pressure against impulsive, reactive aggression. The hot-headed individuals died. The ones who could control themselves, cooperate, read social situations, survived. Violence deployed collectively, suppressed individual violence. The same weapon that produced the wounds at Netaruk produced the social tolerance that makes cities possible. And the data on modern hunter-gatherer societies makes this even harder to sit with. Studies consistently show rates of violent death in pre-state societies that are higher, often significantly higher, than in modern industrial nations. The state did not create war, it just took over the contract. So here you are, 430,000 years of this behind you, and you are sitting somewhere comfortable, probably holding a device that connects you to every piece of information humanity has ever recorded. Somewhere in the background, a notification is telling you about another act of violence somewhere in the world. And it feels distant, it feels like a malfunction, like something that should not still be happening at this point in history. But the bones say otherwise. The program that produced the wounds on Cranium 17 did not disappear. It did not get patched out by civilization or education or the passage of time. It is still running. It runs in the road rage that escalates past any rational explanation. It runs in the office politics that somehow feel, in the moment, like a matter of survival. It runs in the way entire populations can be convinced, in a remarkably short period of time, that another group of people constitutes a threat serious enough to justify almost anything. The mechanism is ancient, only the costumes change. What makes humans genuinely unusual is not that we have this capacity. Chimpanzees have it, wolves have it. What makes us unusual is that we are the only species that builds institutions specifically designed to contain it. Courts, laws, borders, prisons, the entire architecture of civilization is, at some level, a system for managing what happens when that old program activates at the wrong moment, aimed at the wrong target with modern tools in hand. And those institutions are younger than you think, more fragile than they look. The forensic researchers who study prehistoric violence are not pessimists. Most of them will tell you that the long-term trend is real, that organized violence at the population level has declined, that the work of building those containing structures has mattered. Pinker's data, Wrangham's data, the archaeological record taken as a whole, it points towards something that functions like progress. But progress built on top of something that never left. That skull at Cima de los Huesos sat in the dark for 430,000 years before anyone found it. The person who held the weapon is dust. The civilization they never knew would exist has risen and collapsed a dozen times since that moment. And the impulse that swung the tool is still here. It is in you right now, dormant mostly, shaped by everything that came after. The first murder happened 430,000 years ago. The last one hasn't happened yet.